वेलकम टू आवर नेशन स्टेट डायलॉग सीरीज राष्ट्र राज्य संवाद श्रृंखला में आपका स्वागत है. 欢迎收看民族国家对话系列. I'm Dr. Geeta Kochar, moderator for today's discussion. Today it's our pleasure to have with us Lieutenant General Dr. L Narshimhan, PVSM, AVSM, VSM, all these medals. I mean, he's a member of the National Security Advisory Board. He was the director at the Director General at the Center for Contemporary Chinese Studies under MEA. He's also the Emeritus Resource Faculty for the School of International Cooperation, Security and Strategic Languages. He's an Infantry Officer commissioned in 1977, and General Narasimhan ji served as the Defence Attaché in the Embassy of India in China for 3 years. He has been awarded 4 times for his outstanding contributions to the Indian Army by the President of India, and has a graduate degree in mathematics, postgraduate degree in defense studies, and a PhD in India-China relations, which is very crucial for us. He's qualified in Chinese language as well, and has been a keen observer of China for past many years, I think maybe 20 years or so. His expertise spans international relations and international issues, economy, defense-related subjects of China, and has been a part in many track-through dialogues, both in India and abroad. And of course, he's been authoring many articles and journals, and he's been on many shows and things like that. So welcome to our show, sir. It's a pleasure to have you here. Yeah.
Thank you.
So let me just start with a very straight question for India-China relations, which everyone is really, concerned about. See, the Galwan incident created really a deep dent in the trust between India and China. So do you think there is a way forward? And if so, what?
You see, there is always a way forward. I mean, in diplomacy and in political relations, you don't lose hope, you don't give up, okay? You need to keep trying. So that is one particular thing that we need to keep in mind. And as in many forums, our leaders have been saying that there are 3 mutuals that we need to look into in case we need to improve this relationship: mutual respect, mutual sensitivities, and mutual interest. So these are the 3 things that have been told time and again, including our foreign minister, our prime minister, all of them have said this. So the basic premise is that Galwan happened because we had many agreements between us to ensure that such a thing doesn't happen. But then Galwan happened. So therefore, you find all those agreements coming into a question. So in the meeting that both the foreign ministers had in Moscow in September 2020, they agreed on a 5-point agenda, how to overcome this particular issue. I think that is a format to which we need to go back to. And in the last point of that 5-point joint statement that was made, the 5th point was to ensure that in case there are any new confidence building measures are required, we need to think about them. So my own understanding is that we have adequate confidence building measures in place. We need to probably tweak them to ensure that such a face-offs and things like that don't happen. The basic premise to your question that, is there a way forward? There is always a way forward. The only thing is we need to understand the sensitivities of each other, look at the interest of each other, and mutually respect each other's concerns. I think that's the way to go.
So we are starting on a very positive note now. You're absolutely right. Of course, we really need to engage in dialogues and find out really new ways to resolve things. But everyone is really concerned about knowing. They've read a lot about it, but the main issue, that the difficulty in resolving the border issue, even after 18 rounds of border talks, what is the main problem that we are facing now?
You see, in the 18 rounds of border talks, what has happened is that, don't go with the number of talks or number of rounds of talks that take place, okay? Because there is precedence to this in Sundarumchu, where it took 7 years for us to resolve that issue, okay? Right. And there are many number of dialogues and interactions took place before that. So we shouldn't go by the number of rounds of dialogues that have taken place. Our ultimate aim should be to resolve the issue that was created during Galwan. So after 18 rounds of talks, if you take a reality check, and Galwan, we have resolved that Galwan issue by going back a little bit by both the sides. Patrolling point 15, patrolling point 17 have been again resolved in the same manner. and Pankung So North Bank, which was actually under contention, that was also has been tied up. So the issue is, if you look at 18 rounds of talk, there has been progress. It is not that, there is a stalemate and nothing is moving ahead. So we also wanted to resolve the Depsang Bulge and the Demchok in addition to this. So Depsang Bulge is to the north of Galwan, for people who don't know this, to the north of Galwan, and Demchok is to the south of Pankung So, where the incidents happened. So these two issues had been propping up over a period of time, and that also need to be resolved. And so those are being discussed. So this is something that I think will take place over a period of time, but we should not put the number of rounds of talks that have been taking place, but we should look at the results of it. So as long as this is concerned, once if that is done, then we'll go to the phase 2, because we had talked about a three-phase kind of resolution. The first one was the disengagement. The disengagement from the 4 points has already taken place. And once Depsang and Demchok get resolved, I think the disengagement process will totally get completed. And thereafter, we should look at de-escalation, which means that all additional forces that have come into that area need to disengage and go back to their old positions, which were existing before April 2020. And that is the second phase which will happen. And third thing is what I mentioned to you in the first question of yours, that we need to look at to ensure that unilaterally there is no effort to change the status quo on the line of actual control. So this is a three-step process. We are almost completing phase 1, and we need to go to the second part and then to the third part.
Totally agree. I mean, it's a gradual process, and the problem itself is so very complicated that definitely it will need a lot of time and engagement to really come down to everything and resolve. But having said that, I think one of the issues when we were having the second, meeting between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Xi Jinping, the Mamlipuram, meeting. Before that, we had this Kashmir issue propping up, okay? And that has somehow, gone down into what we understand is there is a problem from the Chinese side on Kashmir issue. So how much and why is China affected due to the abrogation of Article 370 in Kashmir? And this is for our viewers who really don't know that these are some linkages there. Yeah.
The way that you need to look at is, first of all, we understand that the boundary issue is a very complex one. Okay, it involved over a period of time starting from 1957. Even before that, when we talked about the maps, etc., there were in 1956, Mr. Chawanlal had responded by saying that these are the old Kuomintang maps. We haven't had time to look at them. We'll resolve it at some point in time. And later on, the stance changed during 1958 and 59, and then what happened with 1962. So the issue is it's a complex one. Therefore, it is going to take time and effort to resolve this. That is number one. Number two, the moment when we abrogated Article 370, Article 370, I don't think affected the Chinese. That was basically the status of, Kashmir and the status of Jammu and Kashmir, the citizens there. I don't think that affected the Chinese so badly. What the Chinese probably perceived in a wrong manner, I would say, is that when we redrew the boundaries within the J&K state to make it two union territories of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, that is where they probably felt that we are again restaking our claim to the old one, which was already existing anyway. We are not changed anything. In fact, after we did this Article 370 and the redrawing of the internal boundaries for administration purposes, Mr. Jaishankar was in China to explain that this doesn't alter the boundary issue in any manner. It is only for the internal administrative purposes that the redrawing has been done. But I think the Chinese have probably not understood that very well, and probably they felt that India is trying to push its claim to the original claim that we had with which is shown in the boundary of the map as it exists today, is something they would have perceived. But then, if you look at the kind of reasons they gave for Galwan to be happening in 2020, I don't think this Article 370 was talked about initially at all. It was, many other things. Infrastructure was being created, the other things were talked about, and that is something which probably forced them to do that. And when Mr. Jaishankar talked about Chinese themselves have given 5 reasons as to why this happened, 370 was not part of it, came in later. So I don't think 370 had a major kind of a contribution to what happened in Galwan. But I think as a supporting kind of an argument at some point in time, it came up in some form or the other. So 370, only fear of the Chinese, as far as that is concerned, is that we are reinforcing our claims to our claim lines that we have as shown in the map of India.
I mean, I'll come back to this question in terms of Pakistan later, but let's talk about the PLA per se. I mean, we know that China is in rigorous drive towards PLA modernization, and at the same time, there is this stress in China about civil-military fusion, that we commonly read a lot about. So, what challenges will India face due to this, and what preparations our armed forces are making to counter this? I mean, whatever you can generally give an idea on. Yeah.
I'll give you that. See, I think the civil-military fusion is not new in China. 23 years ago, if I remember correctly, in the year 2000, when I was preparing to go to China as the Defence Attaché, there was a presentation in IDSA. IDSA used to have this weekly presentations by the scholars on the work that they have done. And they talked about a civil-military integration at that point in time. Okay. So, civil-military fusion is not new in China. It was there already and it was existing for a very long time. The only reason why civil-military fusion has got into the limelight is basically because of the additional thrust that is being given to integrate the development that have taken place in the armed forces and the civilian field. So the moment this was announced, the PLA itself declassified and opened up 7,200 kind of rights that they had to the civilian field. So the civilian field also would have opened up that many or more or less number of inventions that they have done to the PLA. This is not new. Even in India, it happens. Like, for example, when you want to develop something, everything can't be developed by the armed forces or the DRDO. You also get into the academia. You also get into the industry to get this thing going. The only thing is that CMF, the civil military fusion, has got adequate funding, has got adequate thrust, and has got adequate attention of the senior hierarchy in the Chinese governance, and that is where it has got the impetus to actually leverage the development that have taken place in the civilian field and the military field. 2015 September onwards, there was a talk about the modernization of the reformation in the PLA, reforming of the PLA. When I say PLA, it includes PLA, the ground forces, the PLA Air Force, the PLA Navy, the Rocket Force. That time it used to be known as Second Artillery Corps. Now it is known as the Rocket Force. And then the Strategic Support Force and the Logistics Support. All of them put together is known as PLA. The reformation in PLA is again a thing which Mr. Xi Jinping was given a push to, because this process has started sometime in early 90s, 93 onwards to be precise. And every leadership, every level of leadership was given it the kind of push. But probably Mr. Xi Jinping gave a little additional push to the reforms that were to be done. And in that process, if you look at it, there are a number of the command and control system, the organizational structures, the support systems, all of them got changed overnight. So any large armed force which goes through such kind of reformation always has got some issues with it, in the sense that it will take time for it to stabilize and keep going ahead. By 2020, they were supposed to finish the modernization process, the kind of modernization process, particularly in the mechanization and the IT. But then when Galwan happened, and later on when we saw the equipment being inducted into the Tibet region, Tibet Military District region, and Southern Xinjiang Military District, you found that still mechanization process was on. So they are actually, you can say that the process which was to be completed in 2020 is still going on. And then they laid down a target of 2035 to modernize the entire PLA completely. So to that extent, you will find that process will be on. In between, 2027 was talked about a particular waypoint, particularly to say that at the 100th year of the raising of the PLA, that they should have got some kind of modernization, which is a fact. They have modernized a long way. They have come a long way. They are doing a lot of things to modernize themselves. But I think by 2035 is the time when you will find the modernization gets completed by the PLA, and the joint operations and the integrated operations kind of doctrines get into place. So you still have about 10 to 12 years in which this process will be on. Today, if you look at it, the PLA particularly laid more emphasis on the Navy and the Air Force in the last few years. So you find the number of ships in the PLA has gone up. So you find that, numbers at least, the PLA is number one today with 356 ships on its rolls. The Air Force is again modernized, and most of them indigenously. They had a problem of aero engines which they are trying to overcome. So basic thing is the modernization process is going on. The civil military fusion will help in that modernization, and then both will go jointly hand in hand. So that will probably show its effect 5 to 7 years down the line, and then start picking up momentum subsequently as they go along. By 2049, they have laid down the goal for themselves to be capable of, for the PLA to be modernized completely and be capable of winning the wars worldwide, which I think will be the core goal that they'll be looking to achieve.
So I think the civil military fusion thing also came up because of the Wuhan lab thing that we were talking about, or the villages in the border areas. The people started talking about that. But when you're talking about the objectives and ambitions of PLA, one of the things that becomes crucial for us, and especially at a time when we are also, having all moon missions, Chandrayaan 3 has been launched and all of that. PLA is also looking at moon missions and outer space to advance, further. Apart from their own modernization of the land forces and Navy and all of that. So can you just tell us what are that ambitions and objectives of the PLA?
The first thing is, I just want to dispel something which you mentioned, the civil military fusion being part of the Xiaokang villages, The Xiaokang villages need to be looked at a little differently. They have a dual purpose capability, I won't deny that, okay? It can be used by the PLA, it can be used by the border defense forces, and it can be used by civilians. But if you look at the way that these 628 villages have come up all along the border, you look, the Eastern Theater being the major focus, having 400 plus villages coming up there. But if you look at the location of these villages, about 200 of them are closer to the bound LAC, line of actual control, and many of them are behind. So basically, this was a modernization kind of a process that was initiated to develop the border areas, which we are now doing as part of a Vibrant Villages program that the government has announced. So this is part of that kind of a process. But the dual use of those villages cannot be ruled out. So that is the point I wanted to put it out there. On the International Space Station and other capabilities that the PLA is developing, I have always maintained in many of my talks and interviews which I give, that two factors are going to be battle winning for the PLA in any of the future operations. One is the space. The other one is going to be the integration kind of operation that they are planning to do. Okay, space is something which China has developed very quickly and very rapidly. They opened it to the civilian sector in 2018-19, and now number of civilian companies are also doing this space launches and everything. Success rate is questionable, but they are on. The number of companies have already come into being. In the space, they have capabilities for all the things that one would expect a country to have. One is, in terms of reconnaissance, in terms of surveillance, in terms of targeting, in terms of, name a thing. They have the capability to do it. So space is something that China has been concentrating on, and all along, it was under the military. Like earlier, the space program of China was under the General Armament Department before the reforms took place in 2016. Now it is under the PLA, Strategic Support Force. So there has always been an involvement of the military in the space, even though the officially stated policy of China is non-militarization of space. Okay, but there was always a military component associated with this. Now, they are also trying to give the establish a space station by. They were supposed to do it by this year. It will probably get extended by another year or two. Once they do that, thereafter they're also looking at deep space exploration, which that Artemis program and others are actually trying to do. Okay, the issue is that China is a leader in space and space technology, and it will try to continue to maintain that leverage, and the capabilities that come to it from the space are going to be phenomenal. And that is something that we need to be looking at. Coming to the Indian side. Now, if China is doing all this, China is developing, China is inducting new equipment, China is developing Navy, Air Force, space, everything, then what are we doing? That is the thing that we need to be looking at. So we are not been, I'm sure, we all understand that we have not been sitting idle. We have been actually lagging behind in creation of infrastructure that is catching up now. And we're also talking about a Trans-Arunachal highway, which will probably link. In Arunachal, I don't know how many of us would have gone to Arunachal. I commanded the corps there, and so I'll just take 10 seconds to explain this.
Of course.
Arunachal has got deep valleys, deep and narrow valleys. The problem is when, in case of a conflict with China, when you have to move forces, the problem is you have to come back to the confluence and then reinduct somewhere else. So that is going to be prohibitive in terms of time. And it is also going to be difficult in case there is a roadblock happens behind. So to avoid that, you need a Trans-Arunachal highway, which could go across the valleys, and you can shift whenever you need the troops on either side. So that process is already on. I told you about the vibrant villages. To modernize the areas which are in the border, that vibrant villages program has been on for the last 2 years. Because last budget and the last large budget, this year's budget and the previous year's budget, both of them have allocated funds for this. So that process will be on. So the infrastructure development is something that we have been going at it very seriously. That is number one. Number two, in terms of equipment for the armed forces, you find that generally things have been moving in the correct direction, because Navy, if you take Navy, most of the ships that we are creating are making now are indigenously produced. So the external dependency on external sources has reduced considerably. You look at INS Kolkata, INS Chennai, INS Visakhapatnam, a whole lot of ships have come up. All of them have been produced in Indian dockyards. So this is a good advantage. And the second thing that we have been looking at is the Air Force capability. So you found the Rafales. Even today, there is an agreement on 26 Rafales maritime version to come in. So Rafales have come in. The other thing that we have given a boost is to induct Tejas, which is the indigenously produced aircraft, though the engine is, of course, American. But the other things have been made in India, and that has been inducted into the Air Force. And with General Electric trying to produce engines in India itself, and the transfer of technology, that also will actually be good for us. And in terms of, if you look at the ground forces, I'm talking about only the Air Force and the Navy at this point in time, but in the ground forces, if you look at it, you find increasingly we are indigenizing whatever we need to, like artillery guns. Now we are totally producing in India. So similarly, the indigenization process has started about 7-8 years ago, and it is catching up speed. So on equipment profile, you will find increasingly an indigenous version of many of the things that is coming in and inducted into the armed forces. Third is the jointness and integration in training and operations. So you find the theaterization being discussed about every other day. You get some information on theaterization. There has been a serious effort to do the theaterization part. What does this theaterization do to us? That is what we need to understand when we start questioning theaterization or otherwise. The theaterization typically ensures that all the three services and all the support services fight jointly and in an integrated manner. It will involve integration of resources. It will involve reduction of the inventory. It will involve management in a much better manner. And it will also involve command and control to be streamlined totally. Like, for example, today, if anybody thinks that what we are facing China with, you find three or four army commands that are facing it. Then you find the Air Force commands. Then you find naval commands. So the integration and the cooperation, the coordination becomes very difficult. So theaterization will resolve most of these issues. So I think we are going in the right direction. And we also have reoriented certain forces from the Western theater to the Northern theater. And this also will help in facing the threats that we have to face. So overall, I think we have been moving the right direction. I wouldn't say, if you ask me whether we have done enough, I would say we need to do more, but we are in the right direction.
You just mentioned something about, PLA modernization, and you said like it started long time back. But most of our people would be interested in knowing what changed under Xi Jinping's time, specifically in terms of party and PLA relationship, how that has really evolved and how that has really changed, and how do we see that? Yeah.
That's a very interesting and a good question, because most of us feel that Xi Jinping is the one who has probably given the impetus to the PLA, right? That is a general feeling one gets seeing the way he has actually pushed the PLA. The thing that happened was almost every generation of leadership has been telling this, that the PLA should implicitly obey the party. And I heard this when I was sitting in the Great Hall of People on the Pai celebration on the 1st of August. The defense minister was saying it 20 years ago. So the PLA being told to follow the party is a normal thing that has been happening over a period of time, year after year after year. But what has changed under Xi Jinping? I told you about the reforms that took place in 2016. The way that reforms were done, like, you change everything, like your command structure, your organizational structures, your everything, you change overnight. And that kind of a thing is very difficult to absorb in an armed force. Armed forces are slow to actually, slow to adapt changes. So when you impose such a change on the armed forces, it will be extremely difficult for them to absorb this. So to that, he has to give further impetus of his own personality and his own push. So starting from 2018 onwards, on every 1st of January, he started issuing a mobilization order. And that mobilization order, basically the entire PLA used to mobilize for 10 to 12 days on the New Year day, based on that order, do some kind of joint exercises and go back to the barracks. The basic thing that he was trying to do is to bring in cohesion, to bring in jointness, etc., etc. So what he has been trying to do is to ensure that the party's obedience, the PLA's obedience to the party is maintained as it was there, and increase it further. Second, to give his own his own personality on the PLA, to ensure that they are prepared for the kind of operation that they are expected to do. A lot of people talk about Xi Jinping telling the PLA to be prepared for war, trained for war,
I was about to
war
say
fighting,
that,
etc. Okay, so generally the problem that is associated with that is, if I am the commander of troops, when I address the troops, what do I tell them? Don't prepare for war. Don't train for war. What do I tell them? So even as a junior commander, like I was a corps commander, I had 100,000 troops under me. When I go and address them, I will tell them, train realistically, be prepared to fight a war, be prepared to defend your country. This is what I'll tell them, right? So that's what Xi Jinping is saying to everybody, saying that, be prepared to do that, be prepared to do that, etc., etc. So as a commander-in-chief, as he had the title of commander-in-chief sometime earlier, and as a chairman of the Central Military Commission, when he goes and addresses the troops, he will say this, and we have to accept it. Okay. And that doesn't take the importance out of it. Importance is very much there, that he's trying to push them to get prepared, to get into the mode of joint and integrated operations, to absorb the changes that have been given to them, to absorb the new equipment that is coming into them. He's giving that push. But that is not to say that he is now preparing for war tomorrow. He is preparing the PLA for global level operations at some point in time, but it is not necessarily that, kal ko ladai ho jayega. That is not the thing that we need to be looking at.
Yeah, I mean, I think because it's also because people don't understand how China functions in terms of a president also holding a CMC chairman's position. I mean, in India, that's not true. We have a president which is really a government person. Not a party person, also not a military person in that sense. I think that amalgamation in China of party and PLA, and especially Mao has been saying that. I mean, the party rules the gun. So that kind of inheritance, I would say, in terms of PLA party relationship is what is different in China, and people really need to understand that. Now, having talked that, I think I would just move to the last point of our discussion, and that also comes from what we were talking earlier in terms of the Kashmir issue or the 370. I mean, there's a lot of talk, when we say we are confronting China, we always say there's a two-front war. And two front basically, I mean, is about the China-Pakistan nexus, right? So how do you see it, and how do you, I mean, do you believe that this nexus of China-Pakistan is sustainable in current circumstances, and how would we be, facing them or dealing with them? Yeah.
Well, that's a good question again. Like, for example, you don't look at when you are preparing for defending your country, okay? You look at the maximum threat that is possible to you, right? And you should be prepared for it. Otherwise, then, you may not be able to defend your country the way you're expected to defend. So we have got two adversaries. We have Pakistan on the west, and we have China on the north. The thing is, right from independence, for about 50, 60 years, we have been looking more towards Pakistan. When China started growing economically and its military started growing in its own power and everything else, you found that you also need to look at China. And then that brought in the question, what happens if both the fronts get activated at some point in time? It could be varying intensity, it could be varying force levels, whatever. But you need to be prepared for adversaries, simultaneously something happening at both the ends. I'm not saying they'll coordinate, I'm not saying they'll not coordinate. It can happen, it may not happen, but we should be prepared for it. Therefore, the talk of two front came up. The two front was talked about in 2008, I think, for the first time by General Deepak Kapoor, when he was the chief of army staff at that time. So he started talking about the two front that we need to be prepared for. Then people also talked about 2.5 front. Okay, one is the Chinese front, one is the Pakistan front. The other one is the either internal or any other issue that comes up, that will be the half front. So 2.5 fronts also was talked about. I would only like to tell the viewers of this particular event is that please understand that these things have been really, really war gamed within the system. And we who have been, devoting our whole lives to do this, have been looking at this very seriously and how to deal with it in case it happens. So I will not go into the nitty-gritties of it because that will be in the operational domain. I don't want to reveal what we think or what we talk about. But starting from 2008 onwards, we have been working on this to say that, if something happens on both the fronts, how do we deal with it? Is something that we have been working on. So to that extent, I would like to assure the viewers of this particular program that thing is generally being taken care of. And yes, there will be need for resources, there will be need for a change in thinking, there will be need for a change in operational planning. All those things are being looked into. So to that extent, I think we need to be confident that our armed forces and the government will be able to do the needful. And you also mentioned about our president being the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. He is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. But for all operational purposes, it is the Prime Minister and the Defense Minister and the government which actually deals with this particular situation. So therefore, what you said is right in the sense that, like Mr. Xi Jinping also being the chairman of the Central Military Commission, he is also the president of the country, and he is also the General Secretary of the Communist Party. He is all in one. So he is able to orchestrate the things in a manner that things come into play at the right time at the right place. So that kind of a thing in a democracy will be difficult. We need to understand this. But the fact of the matter is, the structures in place today. We have an integrated defense staff. We have a CIDS. We have a CDS. We have the government machinery, and now with theater commands also coming up in some form, you will find that integration coming into play. Okay. So I would like to assure the audience of this program to be rest assured that things are moving in the right direction.
So on a very positive and happy note, I think it was great pleasure talking to you and listening to you, General Narasimhan, and hope we continue our interactions. There are a lot, of our students, our research scholars who would want to know more about what is happening on India and China. And once, things develop further, maybe we resolve our issues or maybe we progress further, we'll be very happy to invite you again. So to our viewers, please hit the like icon and subscribe to our channel for many more interesting discussions. And thank you very much. Namaskar.
Thank you. Thank you very much.